Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Six Path Weeb, your portal to immersive fanfiction and deep anime dives. Today's video explores a compelling fanfic concept, Naruko and the power of the Adamantine chains. Disclaimer: the content on this channel is created purely for entertainment and discussion. I do not own any of the anime footage featured in this video. All rights and credits belong to their respective creators and copyright holders. Now, without further ado, let's dive right in. She hated October 10th. Whenever others talked about their birthdays, there was always joy in their voices, presents, family gatherings, laughter. But for Naruko, the day felt like the opposite. While others celebrated, her day was filled with unease and isolation. Hidden behind a large tree on the edge of the training ground, she watched from the shadows as a group of villagers hurried past, calling out things like, "Find the girl," and "Remember the 4th." She could only hope they would believe she'd remained in the village. "Happy birthday to me," Naruko whispered to herself with a sigh. At least this year, they hadn't found her. The year before, she had been cornered in an alley by older Jinan and hadn't been able to move without discomfort for days afterward. As the last of the searchers disappeared into the distance, Naruko exhaled in relief. Sure, she would need to stay out in the forest overnight and probably wouldn't have anything to eat, but it was better than facing the fear and cruelty she didn't understand. She wandered deeper into the forest, surrounded by towering trees that had hidden the village for generations. If they can keep a whole village safe, she thought, they can hide one little girl. After about 20 minutes of searching, she found a small nook formed beneath thick tree roots and a large bush. She crouched inside. Comfy enough, she muttered and curled up. Exhausted, she drifted into a restless sleep, dreaming of warm meals and kind smiles, things that always felt just out of reach. Naruko was startled awake when a rough hand grabbed her and yanked her from her hiding spot. She landed on the ground with a thud, blinking up at a shinobi standing over her. His face bore old scars, and his stance was unsteady. "You think you can just hide from me?" he yelled, his words slurring slightly. Even from a distance, Naruko could tell he had been drinking. "This is the day I make things right." He moved toward her, anger rising. With a flick of his wrist, something small struck her shoulder, and a sharp ache followed. She looked down and saw the handle of a kunai sticking out of her arm. Panic surged through her as she tried to crawl away, her arm unwilling to respond. Instead of fear breaking her, something within Naruko responded. As the shinobi raised his arm again, translucent chains suddenly burst into view, glowing faintly and snaking out from Naruko's body. In an instant, they wrapped around the attacker and held him in place like puppet strings. He froze, completely restrained. His face shifted from anger to shock. "Monster," he whispered before falling unconscious, the chains leaving him bound and still. Naruko stared in amazement. The chains, had they protected her? Slowly, cautiously, she reached out and touched one of them. It curled gently toward her in response. "Are you protecting me?" she whispered. No one had ever done that before. The ache in her shoulder reminded her of the kunai. Gritting her teeth, Naruko tried to pull it out. It hurt, badly, but she focused and pulled again. Suddenly, one of the chains moved to help her. With a sharp tug, the weapon came free. Naruko gasped, then passed out from the pain and exhaustion. When she awoke, the sky was dark. She looked toward where the shinobi lay, still unconscious. Her thoughts raced. What happens now? They didn't like me before. What if they think I hurt him on purpose? She heard voices in the distance. People were coming. She had to hide. Her previous hiding place was no longer safe, and running was too risky. Frantically, she searched for a way to climb. Just then, a shimmering chain extended from her hand, wrapping itself around a tree branch. Naruko climbed, using the chains like a rope. She repeated the process, scaling higher and higher into the tree until she was safely tucked into the upper branches. Once she was hidden, she wrapped the chains around herself like a harness, anchoring to the tree. It felt surprisingly comforting, like a gentle hug. Down below, voices filled the clearing. "Akihiro? Someone find the Hokage," one of them shouted. Naruko shrank further into the shadows. Soon the Hokage arrived, accompanied by 2 Anbu in masks. The older man stepped forward to examine the unconscious shinobi, his expression unreadable. Hiruzen Sarutobi sighed heavily. The day had already been long, filled with arguments from the village council. As every year, they had tried to convince him to change how Naruko was treated. He'd spent hours pushing back against their cold suggestions, only to return and find something even more troubling, an unconscious shinobi and signs of a strange power in the forest. "Inu," he called. The dog-masked Anbu stepped forward. Can you identify any chakra left behind? The Anbu scanned the area carefully. There are 3 signatures, sir. One belongs to the shinobi. The second feels faint, but familiar. Like the energy from the 9 tails. Sarutobi frowned deeply. And the third? It's powerful, the Anbu whispered. It felt like the chakra chains Lady Kushina once used. Sarutobi's heart ached. If Naruko was awakening that ability, everything would change. She was already misunderstood, this might make things even harder. This information must remain secret, he instructed firmly. Not a word. From this moment, it's classified. The Anbu nodded solemnly. Turning to the rest of the group, Hiruzen addressed them. We have a serious incident. Spread out and find whoever is responsible. Do not take any action until I give the order. When only his Anbu remained, he quietly added, find Naruko. She must be found safely and without harm. As the others left, Hiruzen stood alone with his thoughts. He looked toward the treetops. Minato, Kushina. I promise to protect your daughter. I hope I haven't failed you. A single tear rolled down his cheek. Above him, Naruko watched, barely daring to breathe. She had come closer, hoping the Hokage would understand her side of the story. But what she heard next made her entire world shift. I'm so sorry. Minato, Kushina. I've failed your daughter. Naruko's eyes widened. Your daughter? Questions swirled in her mind. Why had he said that? What did it mean? Why did she feel a connection to those names? Still wrapped in her protective chains, she held her breath, heart pounding in her chest, unsure of what the morning would bring, but for the first time, a spark of hope flickered inside her. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone after all. Naruko heard a rushing sound in her ears, and for a moment, she couldn't believe what she was hearing. The old man hadn't seemed especially concerned about Akiro's absence. Instead, he seemed more focused on the possibility of danger in the nearby woods. He had only sent out ninja to find one person, Naruko. So if he was expressing regret now, speaking of having let someone down. Very few things had influenced Naruko's life more than being an orphan. For most people, family gave them a sense of identity. Parents, grandparents, cousins, aunts, and uncles helped form a foundation, showing a person where they came from and who they might grow into. Even if not perfect, families connected people to something larger than themselves. Naruko had never known that feeling. To her, it had always seemed like she had simply appeared one day, unwelcome and misunderstood. She had no family to turn to for comfort, no memories of those who came before her to draw strength from. Naruko wasn't a branch from a great tree, she felt like a single root trying to grow alone. She had always dreamed of knowing who her parents were, of feeling that connection to something beyond her, but it had never seemed possible. And then, in an instant, her entire world shifted. Maybe she was just hoping too hard, but now there were possible names for the parents she had only ever imagined. The discovery brought a sudden wave of joy, quickly followed by frustration. That old man knew. She thought fiercely. Unseen, her eyes subtly shifted, her pupils narrowing slightly, and the faint glow of her chakra chains pulsed around her, reacting to her emotions. Naruko had spent her young life wondering about her origins. Once, she had gathered enough courage to ask Hiruzen if he knew who her parents were. She could still picture the gentle smile he wore when he said he didn't know. And now it seemed like he had known all along. Without realizing it, Naruko began to retract her chains and pull herself higher into the branches of the tree. She didn't want to return, not yet. Not when it felt like the one person she had trusted had been keeping such an important truth from her. At the highest point in the tree, she anchored herself, ready to think things through. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing for sure, she was tired of being treated unfairly by the villagers. She reached out and gently brushed her translucent chain. It was her first real companion, and maybe now she had the names of her parents. That was more than she'd ever had in the village. She looked up at the sky. Despite everything, for the first time, she felt a quiet sort of peace. Even though this day had always been difficult for her, tonight felt different. As she drifted off to sleep, a small smile played on her lips. Maybe October 10th isn't so bad after all. 6 months later. Living in the woods was something every ninja learned to adapt to. Patrols, deliveries, and missions often required spending time in nature, and the Ninja Academy taught the basics of survival. But living alone in the forest as a 4-year-old? That was another challenge entirely. Though the fire country wasn't known for freezing temperatures, it did see frequent rain. Naruko learned quickly that while her chakra chains were helpful for many things, they were not effective as umbrellas. During those early weeks, she realized how important shelter was. It wasn't just a place to stay dry, it was where she felt safe. With her chains letting her stay high in the treetops, she ventured deeper into the forest and eventually found a hollow partway up a large tree. Carefully, she deepened it using the sharp edge of her chain until she could curl up inside it comfortably. It became her cozy little den, her first real home. Once shelter was taken care of, food became the next priority. Naruko had grown up surrounded by shops and never had to gather food before. She didn't know which wild foods were safe, but she remembered some berries she had seen before and decided to try her luck. Unfortunately, her first choices made her quite sick, and she had to spend several days resting in her tree. Her strong natural resilience helped her recover, and she made a mental note to avoid those berries in the future. Over time, she figured out which fruits and roots were safe to eat. A nearby stream also gave her fresh water. Hunting was something Naruko did only when necessary. She didn't like causing harm, and fire in the forest was always risky. But in these moments, her chains truly shone. They let her move easily between the trees, and she quickly learned how to use them in clever ways. She practiced forming multiple chains at once, splitting and extending them, though using the full length was tiring. Still, she found joy in training. Swinging through the trees like a monkey, she felt more free than ever before. When food was scarce, she would quietly wait above the stream for an animal to pass by. She learned that they were very quick to run if she made noise. So instead, she began striking from a distance, launching a chain quickly and retrieving it just as fast. It was quiet, effective, and safe. For the first time in her life, Naruko felt calm. She had food, her chains to keep her company, and a newfound sense of independence. In her little tree hollow, she even carved two figures into the wood, one meant to represent her mother, and the other her father. She would talk to them every day, sharing her adventures and thoughts. Along with her chains, they became her family and spirit. Sometimes, Naruko would sneak close to Konoha's training grounds and watch the older ninja practice. She was careful not to be seen. From a distance, she would collect discarded kunai and forgotten scrolls, which she kept hidden in her den. On rainy days, she'd study the scrolls, slowly teaching herself how to read and throw kunai with precision using her chains. Her little collection grew over time, and so did her knowledge. She began sneaking closer and more often, eager to learn more about the ninja world. While Naruko's life grew brighter, Hiruzen Sarutobi's became more difficult. The council was in constant disagreement, the village hidden in the clouds was suggesting a suspicious alliance, and Danzo had become increasingly forceful. Hiruzen missed Naruko dearly, though others in the village viewed her absence differently. Some feared the unknown, while others failed to recognize her value. But for Hiruzen, her disappearance weighed on his heart more than any of them could know. I will take these latest results to my cage, and hopefully we can continue building a more cooperative relationship between our two villages, the man said. Hiruzen maintained a calm exterior, though he couldn't help feeling disappointed. There was still no formal agreement, no concrete steps toward trade or mutual aid. After nearly 3 months of back and forth, they had merely agreed that they would like to agree on something. Eventually. Maybe. Still, Hiruzen managed a polite smile. I look forward to it, he replied evenly and waited until the visitor had left before letting his face fall. He reached under his desk for the bottle of emergency tea he kept for moments like this. A long sip and a slow sigh later, and he felt somewhat more grounded. The mountain of paperwork on his desk never seemed to shrink, mirroring the constant flow of new concerns he had to address. There were petitions for more support for the hospital, the village police, the academy, and the civilian council. Denied, he muttered, setting another request aside. Everyone wanted more, but resources were limited. Looking out over the village, Hiruzen felt the weight of his responsibility pressing heavily on him. I was never meant to wear the hat again, Minato, he thought, his voice in his head heavy with emotion. He longed for the peace of retirement but couldn't yet find someone he trusted to take over the role. He turned back to the seemingly endless stack of papers, briefly entertaining the idea of incinerating them, though he suspected they would only multiply. Again, a firm voice commanded. Hinata looked up at her father, then to the branch member across from her. He was clearly tired, his breathing heavy from the extended training session. Father, he seems really tired. Maybe we should pause for a little? Hinata asked quietly. She always felt uneasy using other people as practice targets, even if it was necessary to master the gentle fist technique. The precision required was daunting, and her lack of confidence often meant repeating the same motion several times. Her father's expression hardened. If you do not wish to see him exhausted, then execute the technique correctly the first time, he said firmly. His disappointment was clear. Hinata flinched slightly and turned back, her heart aching for the person standing in front of her. She tried to offer a silent apology with her eyes. Taking her stance again, she moved forward and struck. Her father's only response, again. 1 year later. Naruko sat at the edge of what she called her territory, gazing toward the distant lights of Konoha. Her time in the forest had changed her. The once small and unsure girl had grown lean and agile, her movements sure and steady. Her sun-kissed skin and longer, lighter hair gave her a quietly radiant appearance. But the most notable change was in her eyes. They were no longer wide with wonder, they were sharp, calm, and perceptive, taking in every movement of the forest around her. Over time, she had begun observing Konoha again from a distance. Despite the hardships she had endured, the glowing lights of her former home still pulled at her. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine returning. Maybe, just maybe, they had forgotten the past? But by day, such hopes felt distant and unrealistic. She knew better than to assume forgiveness would come easily. So she stayed hidden, never venturing beyond the outer training fields. Tonight, something was different. One of the clan compounds was glowing unusually bright, and people were rushing around in urgency. Naruko's curiosity drew her closer than usual. From her vantage point in the trees, she could hear voices calling out, "Find her!" and "Kumo." She wasn't sure what or who Kumo referred to, but clearly someone important was missing. Still, it wasn't her concern. She turned to leave, but then saw movement in the shadows. A figure dressed in black, with a covered face, was running with a sack slung over their shoulder. Something about the way the sack shifted made Naruko pause. A faint sound, too high-pitched to be an adult, came from within. Her heart tensed. This wasn't just suspicious, this was wrong. From her perch, Naruko moved silently ahead of the masked figure and prepared. A chain shimmered into being, formed from her chakra, and launched toward the intruder. He twisted at the last moment, and it hit his shoulder instead of center mass. The sack fell from his back. Inside, Naruko glimpsed a girl, small, with dark hair and pale skin. She narrowed her eyes. Whoever this intruder was, he had crossed into her forest and put a child in danger. That was not acceptable. The masked figure proved quick and skilled, grabbing the chain and yanking. Naruko was pulled from her perch and hit the ground with a painful jolt. She gritted her teeth through the sting. A kid? Really? The stranger scoffed as he stepped forward, eyeing her curiously. That chain ability of yours. Interesting. Naruko struggled upright, despite the soreness in her limbs. People aren't things you can just take, she said firmly. The man chuckled darkly. That's not up to me. I just follow orders. He looked back toward the girl in the sack. Both of you will bring me a lot of attention. Naruko's chains burst forward again, more numerous this time. The man dodged, but they curved in the air and struck from behind. He grunted in frustration and tossed several kunai her way. She avoided most, but one grazed her side, and she stumbled back with a wince. As her strength faltered and her vision dimmed, she looked toward the young girl, who was watching her with wide, fearful eyes. Naruko managed to mouth the words, "I'm sorry. I tried." Inside Naruko's mindscape. Naruko awoke in a dim corridor, walls lined with pipes and a shallow stream of water beneath her feet. Despite the surroundings, she was dry. She moved toward a distant light, where enormous iron bars stood like a gate. Behind them, a red glow grew into a massive eye. The towering figure of a fox emerged, its presence immense and powerful. "So, you've finally arrived, Warden," the voice echoed around her. "Warden?" Naruko asked, baffled. "You may not have built this prison, but you are now the one responsible for it. And frankly, this place could use some work." "I didn't know he could dodge my chains," she muttered, frustration in her voice. There's a big difference between surprising a tired ninja and confronting a trained one on alert. "Still, you did surprisingly well," the fox acknowledged, shifting its tails. Naruko stared in amazement. "You're the Nine Tails?" "Indeed. And while I can recover from injuries, it's not exactly pleasant. If you get hurt, so do I, and neither of us wants that," the fox replied, a note of humor in its voice. Naruko's eyes widened. "Wait, you knew my father?" "Yes. A brilliant sealing specialist. But let's focus, I'm lending you chakra. You'll be able to create more chains than ever before. Use them wisely, and don't hold back." Naruko nodded. "Got it." As her surroundings began to fade, the fox watched thoughtfully. "Another chain user. Maybe if I treat this one right, she'll clean this place up before she leaves." Real world. Naruko opened her eyes, and the first thing she saw was the surprised face of the girl she had been trying to help. Tears still traced the girl's cheeks, but her expression now showed more astonishment than fear. Her eyes. They're so unique, Naruko thought, intrigued. Despite the lingering discomfort, her body felt more energized than ever, even with the kunai that had been lodged in her chest just moments before. With a soft sound, the kunai was pushed out, and the injury sealed on its own. Even though she had witnessed it, it still felt surreal. A soft gasp made Naruko look up. The Kumo shinobi stood frozen, clearly startled. How? The man began, but before he could finish, Naruko was already standing between him and the girl. I don't know how you're still standing, the shinobi said, narrowing his eyes. But you're becoming more difficult than expected. He quickly formed a series of hand signs. Naruko tensed. She had seen shinobi training before, performing techniques that could do extraordinary things. As the man extended his hand, a surge of lightning shot toward her. Naruko reacted instinctively, summoning as many chakra chains as she could. Unlike her usual efforts, where only a few chains would form, dozens now extended out, creating a protective barrier between her and the girl. The bolt of lightning struck the semi-transparent chains, resulting in a bright flash. When the light faded, the shinobi had already moved, surprised by the complete defense. He frowned at the sight of the chains surrounding Naruko, then began forming another series of hand signs. Naruko realized she couldn't stay on the defensive. If she gave him too many chances, he might find a way past her defenses. Her chains launched forward, chasing after the shinobi. They branched out rapidly, increasing in number and intensity with each second. Though she wasn't consciously guiding each one, her instincts took control. The shinobi moved with speed and skill, despite the earlier surprise, but Naruko's chains kept pressing. Eventually, one struck his right leg, then another caught his left. As he tried to fend them off, another wrapped around his arm. He found himself surrounded by a forest of chains, each hovering but not striking. Naruko stood breathing heavily, not just from the effort of the fight, but from the internal struggle she felt. The new power rushing through her was making it harder to focus, and she had to resist the overwhelming drive to continue the attack. She closed her eyes, centering herself, and gradually the chains withdrew and dissolved into harmless mist. The shinobi, unable to move, collapsed to the ground, subdued but safe. Turning back to the girl, Naruko carefully removed the last of the sack that had been used to restrain her. She untied her hands and feet, then gently took off the gag. "Are you all right?" she asked gently, concern in her voice. She glanced at the area where she'd been struck earlier, but her clothes now only showed a tear. The skin underneath had completely healed. The girl nodded quickly and then returned the question. Thank you. Are you okay?" she asked, glancing at Naruko's chest. "I'm fine. I recover fast," Naruko replied with a light smile, hearing a soft chuckle echo in the back of her mind. The girl looked like she wanted to say more but hesitated. "Who are you?" she asked quietly. Naruko debated giving a false name but decided the truth wouldn't hurt. She was already planning to find a new hiding spot soon anyway. "Naruko. Uzumaki Naruko," she said with a friendly grin, holding out her hand. The girl hesitated, then reached out and took it. "Hyuga Hinata," she replied softly. Before they could say more, a sound of someone crashing through the trees caught Naruko's attention. "Oops, time to go," she said, sending one of her chains up into the trees and using it to launch herself away. As she vanished into the canopy, she called down, "Nice to meet you, Hinata. Take care." Naruko swung through the forest swiftly, heading toward her hidden shelter. She always had backup spots in case she needed to disappear quickly. It didn't take long for her to reach her hidden cubby, where she kept a pack she'd picked up from a training field. Inside were scrolls, tools, and a few of her favorite finds, smooth stones and colorful shells. Before leaving, she rested a hand on the carved figures representing her parents. "I'm heading out, Mom, Dad. I'll take you with me soon," she whispered, then gathered her things and dashed into the forest, moving away from that part of the village. Dash. Hisashi ran through the forest, choosing speed over stealth. The false ambassador had a significant head start, and if they didn't find him soon, they might lose the trail altogether. The thought of what might have happened to his niece pushed him forward. Just beyond the outer wall of Konoha, he reached a clearing and came to a sudden stop. His niece sat in the center, unharmed except for a few scrapes. But the clearing itself looked as if a great struggle had occurred. There was a shallow crater, kunai scattered about, and dozens of small puncture marks in the trees and ground. Even the Kumo shinobi lay motionless nearby, subdued by what looked like hundreds of precision strikes. Despite the damage to the area, Hinata seemed mostly unhurt. Hisashi ran to her side immediately. "Are you all right?" he asked, kneeling beside her. She nodded. "What happened?" he asked, more gently now. "Did you do all this?" he asked, gesturing around. Hinata blushed, shaking her head quickly. "And no. It was Naruko-chan," she said, still wide-eyed. Hisashi raised an eyebrow. He didn't recall any shinobi named Naruko, especially one capable of such an impressive technique. "Who is Naruko?" he asked, puzzled. "The one who saved me and stopped the bad person," Hinata explained. Her words were simple, but her tone was filled with admiration. Hisashi sighed, recognizing that she was still very young. This mystery would take time to solve. He created a shadow clone to carry the subdued shinobi back to Konoha, carefully collected the sack and bindings as evidence, then lifted Hinata into his arms. As he glanced around the clearing one last time, he thought to himself, "Whoever Naruko is, I hope I can thank her someday." This could have ended very differently. Hokage's office, the next day. "You're sure it was her?" Hiruzen asked. Inoki nodded. "I'm sure. She looks a little different now, but anyone living in the forest for over a year is bound to appear less polished. And those were definitely adamantine chains. What I can't figure out is the sheer number of them. If I recall correctly, even Kushina-san could only create about a dozen. Naruko had to have formed at least 5 times that, not even counting the smaller branches she split off." Despite himself, Inoki was impressed. It wasn't every day a 5-year-old managed to subdue a Jonin-level opponent. "It's possible that the stress of the situation allowed her to access some hidden potential," Hiruzen said. He deliberately avoided mentioning the 9 tails. Inoki, like the other council members, was aware of Naruko's unique circumstances, but it was best not to bring attention to it. Inoki nodded and continued. "So, what's our course of action? Kumo isn't going to be pleased about their ambassador being caught attempting to take a bloodline. And the council is already aware of much of what occurred." Hiruzen gave a tired nod, then looked at Inoki seriously. He disliked deception, but sometimes it was necessary. "Revise the report. State that the one who intercepted the ambassador was a 15 or 16-year-old kunoichi wearing an Iwa headband. The report will frame the incident as a plot designed to provoke tension between the villages." Inoki inclined his head respectfully. "And how should we address the Hyuga heiress calling Naruko her savior?" "She's 5, Hiruzen replied flatly. "At that age, children can easily misunderstand or misremember what happened. It's critical that Naruko not be officially credited with such an event, especially involving a high-ranking shinobi. The council might overreact and insist on bringing her back in a way that would not be in her best interest." Inoki had never judged Naruko by her legacy, but he knew how harsh the council could be. He hesitated before asking. "And what about Naruko herself? She's clearly nearby, and likely hasn't gone far from Konoha. It's not safe out there for a child on her own." Hiruzen's expression softened, weighted by regret from the day Naruko disappeared nearly 2 years ago. "I'll send Inu and Kat. They already understand her abilities and were once trusted by her. If anyone has a chance of being accepted by her again, it's them." Inoki looked as if he might object, but Hiruzen continued. "She's managed to avoid detection for almost 2 years. If I send a large search team, she'll sense it and either hide deeper or leave entirely. In either case, we could lose her. Kat is highly skilled, and Inu is one of my top trackers. They can manage this." Inoki nodded in agreement and exited the office quietly. Hiruzen looked up at the portrait of Minato on the wall beside the other Hokages. "Stay safe, Naruko," he murmured. Hyuga compound. Night was calm in the Hyuga estate. Known for its order and grace, any kind of late-night disturbance was uncommon and discouraged. In her room, Hinata prepared for bed. Her bruises had faded significantly, thanks to generous use of healing ointments and plenty of rest. Now, they were faint and nearly invisible. As she nestled into her bed, she glanced out her window toward the forest surrounding the compound. "Good night, Naruko-chan," she whispered, already drifting off. Though she worried that the memory of the incident might bring unpleasant dreams, she felt comforted knowing there was a kind, brave girl with golden hair and shining chains who would always protect her. In the forest around Konoha. It had taken Naruko most of the day to travel far enough to feel safe. She'd moved quietly, making her way around nearly a quarter of Konoha's outskirts. Once she found a sturdy old tree, she built herself another small shelter inside its hollow trunk, safe, cozy, and familiar. Inside, she resumed carving her little wooden family. Her new creations were more lifelike than the older ones. As stars dotted the sky, Naruko admired her handiwork. "Good night, everyone," she whispered gently. In the fading twilight, she imagined they were smiling back at her. Her eyes settled on the tallest figure, her father, modeled after herself. The mother figure was shorter with long carved hair, though Naruko's carving skills made it difficult to capture delicate features. A new addition stood nearby, a small figure of a girl with wide eyes looking protectively over the rest. As Naruko fell asleep, her dreams were filled with thoughts of soft smiles, friendly eyes, and the peaceful rustle of the forest trees. Konoha was a village built on stability. Founded during the chaotic era of warring clans, it was established as a sanctuary from the constant strife that plagued the ninjas of the time. The village's creation was gradual, starting as a simple area often frequented by the Senju and Uchiha clans, then evolving into a fortified town that attracted more clans from nearby regions, and finally transforming into a bustling village that accommodated both shinobi and civilians. As shinobi from various clans gathered, it became clear that a structured ranking system was necessary to assess their skills. The system was straightforward: Junin at the base level, Chunin, then Jonin, and Kage at the top. Among the Chunin and Jonin ranks, the Anbu selected the most exceptional shinobi, forming their elite core for the welfare of the village. It was said that an Anbu Jonin was the epitome of skill, a shinobi refined into one of the most powerful warriors. At that moment, two of these highly skilled shinobi were being outwitted by a 5-year-old. "It's been almost 3 months, Kat remarked with a sigh. The rain was coming down once again, and she, like her namesake, was not fond of being wet. 3 months of scouring Konoha from top to bottom. How do we even know she's still here?" Inu simply shrugged, replying, "You heard the Hokage. She was still here when Kumo tried to abduct the Hyuga heiress. If she stayed this long, there's no reason to think she's left now. The forests provide her with food, water, and shelter, if that little hideout we found is anything to go by." They had stumbled upon the hideout 2 weeks into their search, when Inu noticed a series of marks on the tree bark caused by Naruko's chains. "Why leave when everything you need is here?" Kat groaned in frustration. "That's another thing. That hideout was nearly 50 feet up in the air. We can't search every tree in the entire forest. Heck, even the whole Anbu couldn't do that in 30 years. Inu could understand her irritation, but a small part of him admired how thoroughly Naruko had evaded 2 trained Anbu. If she was this skilled at stealth now, how formidable would she become with proper training? It was a thought that made him nervous. "Well, we know she's not here, so that's a start. We don't have to check every single tree, just focus on the lower branches like before. Eventually, we'll find her." He motioned toward the next area to search. 15 trees down, 200 more to go. High in the trees above them, Naruko smiled to herself. It was frustrating to have to hide from 2 active seekers in what she considered her home, but the constant game of evasion was keeping her mind sharp. At first, she had kept her distance from the 2, staying in the higher parts of the treetops to avoid being detected. As the days turned into weeks, and eventually months, Naruko had transformed it into a game. She would follow them, getting closer and closer, testing how close she could get before they noticed her. On a few occasions, it seemed like they had sensed her presence, but so far, she had managed to retreat and avoid being discovered through either skill or luck. Her breakthrough had come when she overheard a conversation between the 2 about finding her previous hideout. She had never considered the marks her chains left behind, nor how they could be used to track her. From that moment on, she made a conscious effort to avoid using the lower branches and stuck to the higher canopy, where it was more difficult for anyone to spot her. Naruko knew that, despite her speed, she wouldn't be able to outrun trained shinobi if they found her trail. So, she was careful to avoid leaving any marks that could give her away, even if it meant exerting a little extra effort to extend her chains higher. The extra practice, though, was good for her, and the safety was worth the trouble. While her hide-and-seek game was an entertaining distraction, Naruko had started spending less time in the deeper parts of the forest and more time observing the practice fields used by Konoha's shinobi. What had started as a way to pass the time had quickly become an obsession after she had stumbled upon a ninja practicing fire jutsu. Watching an ordinary person breathe fire or sink into the earth like a mole was fascinating, even though Naruko didn't understand how it was done. While she had not yet figured out the connection between the hand movements and the final results of the jutsu, she enjoyed watching the practice of weapons and taijutsu stances, trying to mimic them herself. Over the past few months, Naruko had shifted her attention several times, but only the latest target had held her focus for longer than a week or 2. She had discovered the training field by accident, having traveled further than usual in search of food in the forest. The sharp thunk of kunai hitting wood had piqued her curiosity, leading her to a training ground nearly a mile away from any other. There, she had seen something that left a lasting impression and brought her back every day for nearly 3 weeks. The person training at the field was a boy, no older than 12, with dark hair and striking features. The boy was so still that Naruko almost missed him entirely until he exploded into action. In a series of swift movements, the boy threw several kunai. The first was deflected by the ones thrown after it, and the path of the blade seemed to curve entirely around a tree. When the boy finally allowed the kunai to sink into the tree, it was dead center in the target Naruko hadn't even noticed. Naruko had witnessed many incredible things over the years, lightning at people's fingertips, water transforming into massive dragons, and techniques that could make the earth itself rise against an opponent, but none of the shinobi she had seen perform these techniques exhibited the same dedication and concentration as this boy. The only thing that came close was the time Naruko had watched a fox hunt in the woods. There was a similar focus, where the only thing that mattered was the task at hand. This boy seemed to put that level of devotion into everything he did, and Naruko found herself drawn to him, like a moth to a flame. For the last 3 weeks, she had been watching him and attempting to imitate his movements, not realizing that her young mind had started to view him as a role model, someone she could model herself after. It took Naruko less than 15 minutes to reach the training ground from where she had been observing Kat and Inu. Even though it was still hours before midday, she could see that the other figure had already been training for some time. Settling down on a medium-height branch, she watched the figure attempt something new. As she observed, the figure's form seemed to waver slightly, growing indistinct and distorted. This continued for several seconds until the figure dissolved into a number of crows that scattered around the clearing. For a moment, Naruko was shocked, frantically looking around, wondering if the figure was all right. She let out a small breath of relief when the figure reappeared in the clearing not far from where they had disappeared in the flock of crows, now panting slightly. After a moment, they straightened, wiping sweat from above their forehead protector, and took a stance. Naruko leaned forward slightly, excited to see what the figure would do next. The figure made the same flicking motion with their hand, a move Naruko had come to recognize over the last few weeks, and kunai blurred away from them. Unfortunately for Naruko, it was only when the kunai slammed into the tree bark an inch to the right of her head that she realized the figure was no longer standing in the field. She froze and was about to bolt when she felt something cold and sharp against her neck. "I have some questions for you," came an emotionless voice from behind her. "I think it's in your best interest to answer them truthfully." Uchiha Itachi was never the most sociable person. A pacifist by nature, he had been pressured by his family to live up to his status as the heir to a ninja family for his entire life, and had withdrawn from others when it became obvious that they did not share his aversion to violence. The Uchiha were considered the best, his family maintained, and therefore above petty concerns like worrying about the damage caused to opponents or how actions would influence the lives of others. After all, if they weren't Uchiha, why should they matter? But they did to Itachi, and this made any interaction with his family complicated. Training had been an escape for him. His rising skill served as a deterrent so he didn't have to participate in violence he so abhorred. Despite his fearsome reputation, he hadn't had to cause harm to anyone on a mission in almost 2 years, preferring to simply avoid conflict when possible, and attacking to incapacitate if forced. Inside the Uchiha compound, his reputation managed to keep him from being challenged, but it had furthered his isolation until only 2 Uchiha regarded him as a person and not a weapon. This combined with his naturally quiet demeanor made Itachi the kind of living ghost that most people avoided, silent, yet capable of making others uncomfortable simply by existing nearby. True to his nature, he had chosen a training ground far from the normal bustle of the village, where he could keep to himself and hone his skills away from the fearful eyes of the villagers. His training ground had served him well, as his recent appointment to the Anbu Corps could attest, and he constantly pushed himself. Out there, he could forget all the disagreements with his clan, the awe-filled gazes of the villagers, and simply focus on the joy of perfecting his skill, on overcoming challenges and becoming stronger as a result. So, it greatly confused him when, starting a week and a half ago, he no longer felt the serenity that made his isolated training ground so important to his state of mind. Confused, he had pushed himself harder, hoping it was simply a passing feeling, but it persisted, making him uneasy in a place that had once been his sanctuary. Eventually, he forced himself to approach the problem from a new angle. As far as he knew, there had been no change in him, so it followed that his surroundings must have changed. Given his main reason for being all the way out in the woods was solitude, it seemed likely that an intruder was the cause of his discomfort. Itachi's plan to catch the intruder was simple: wait until he began to feel uneasy in the training field, Then use a wide-range genjutsu and see if anyone reacted to it. As he cast the technique, he heard a slight sound of surprise coming from one of the trees surrounding the training ground. A quick glance with his Sharingan activated allowed him to see the chakra network of a hidden figure. Not reacting to the presence, he took his stance, flung several kunai in a deflection pattern, and quickly used a shunshine to appear behind the figure, reflexively holding a kunai at their neck. He was surprised by how small the figure seemed from behind, but ninja were rarely what they appeared to be, and more dangerous threats had come in smaller packages. "I have some questions for you," he intoned emotionlessly. "And I think it's in your best interest to answer them truthfully." That was when everything changed. Itachi, a master of the Sharingan, and one of the most skilled ninja in Konoha, had grown accustomed to the unusual due to Chakra's ability to allow many extraordinary feats. However, seeing several thick, pointed chains burst from the small figure in front of him, without any hand signs or visible chakra molding, nearly shook him. The fact that the chains were nearly invisible to the Sharingan, even a fully matured one like his, pushed him beyond his usual composure. Though trained to never be caught off guard, it was difficult to dodge the initial explosion of chains. As each chain shot outward in a straight line, smaller side chains burst from the links in even intervals. The combination of the surprise and the near invisibility of the chains forced Itachi to retreat, reflexively dodging the projectiles, and stare in shock at the figure who had been watching him for the past few weeks. His first thought was that the figure resembled an Inuzuka, with the wild demeanor of one of their Ninken users and a ragged appearance suggesting a rough approach to hygiene. However, closer inspection revealed major differences. The figure's clothes were no longer merely worn but were in complete disrepair. Their pants barely reached below their knees, and they wore only a short vest, what was left of an orange jacket. Barefoot, their feet had a leathery texture, easily gripping the rough tree bark without discomfort. Yet it was the face that held Itachi's attention. Long reddish blonde hair framed a face nearly identical to one Itachi hadn't seen in nearly 6 years. "The color is wrong, but she looks just like the Yondaime." The thought was so unexpected that Itachi nearly lost his balance on the branch, staring at the figure as if seeing a ghost. The Yondaime had visited the academy several times during Itachi's tenure, sometimes teaching or observing others. Kakashi and Kushina had been with him on those occasions. Seeing the figure shift their weight as if preparing to flee, Itachi made a quick decision. Taijutsu was ill-advised with chains curving around him like the heads of a hydra, and ninjutsu would likely cause more damage than he intended. His decision was clear. He caught the figure's gaze once more, startlingly blue eyes meeting his red, and with a quick hand sign, he initiated an illusion technique. Itachi watched as the figure's eyes dilated, then closed. No longer holding themselves to the branch, they fell, but Itachi caught them easily, bringing them safely to the forest floor. Itachi looked at the girl, her face unreadable. He'd rarely been confronted with such a mystery. Why had the girl been spying on him? What were the chains he had seen, and why didn't they register properly with his Sharingan? Why did he feel as if he had seen them somewhere before? And, most importantly, why was someone who looked eerily like the most beloved leader in Konoha's history wandering alone in the forest, looking more like a hermit than a human being? Nothing was adding up, and Itachi was beginning to suspect that the only one who could answer those questions was the girl currently unconscious on the ground next to him. As he looked up at the sky, Itachi sighed quietly. Why is it that the more I try to live a quiet life, the more fate seems to enjoy playing with me? No answer came from the floating clouds, and Itachi glanced at the girl once more. Sighing again, he sat down next to her, waiting for her to wake up. Today was supposed to answer questions, not raise more. Naruko awoke suddenly, accustomed to transitioning quickly from sleep to full alertness due to her time spent living in the forest. One couldn't catch food or ward off foxes lurking near one's home if it took 10 minutes to shake off sleep, and she had learned this lesson early. Her only problem was that she couldn't remember falling asleep, and this certainly wasn't her usual cozy spot in the tree. It took only a second for her memory to click back into place, including her last recollection of those swirling red eyes. She jumped to her feet quickly, 2 chains reflexively extending from her lower back, and scanned her surroundings. The same person she had been observing for so long was seated just a few yards away, staring at her. Naruko kept herself in a defensive crouch but avoided meeting his gaze, remembering how easily she had been captured before. She waited for some sign that he would attack as he had earlier, but none came. He simply watched her, unmoving, and waited. Itachi had been surprised at how quickly Naruko had gone from being completely asleep to fully alert, but now he was facing a dilemma. She was extremely wary of him, and unless he wanted to repeatedly knock her unconscious, her chains would make things difficult. If he hoped to get any answers, he had to figure out a way to gain her trust, at least a little, and that would be difficult with someone as cautious as she was. He had just decided that the best course of action would be to attempt to talk to her when he heard her stomach growl loudly. At first, Itachi didn't recognize the sound, but the girl before him shrank lower into her crouch, and a faint blush appeared on her face. Itachi almost laughed out loud, and a small smile tugged at his lips. He reached back to retrieve a ration bar from one of the pouches on his waist but stopped when the chains pointed toward him and began to sway back and forth like serpents. Interestingly, without his Sharingan activated, he could see them perfectly. Another mystery to add to the list, he thought. Moving slowly to avoid startling her further, Itachi pulled a ration bar from his pack and held it out to Naruko. He wasn't sure if she recognized it, but she didn't attack or run, which Itachi took as a good sign. With a neutral expression, he gently tossed the bar toward her. Blindingly fast, one of the chains shot out and speared the bar, holding it 4 feet away from her body. Naruko eyed it suspiciously, and a third chain snaked from behind her back to poke the bar. With surprising dexterity, she peeled the wrapper off and examined the food closely. "It's food," Itachi said. Naruko jumped slightly, and for a moment, Itachi worried she might flee. He slowly took another ration bar from the same pouch, unwrapped it, and took a bite. Naruko watched him chew and swallow before gingerly bringing up the bar she had captured, mimicking his movements. She chewed slowly, but seemed calmer now. Itachi took another bite and observed as Naruko began devouring the bar. She doesn't look malnourished, but no one would let a child wander these forests, much less dressed like that. She's clearly been on her own for quite a while. Itachi mused as they ate in silence. He was surprised that someone so young could survive alone for so long, but the chains would undoubtedly be a significant advantage in the forest. As they finished their ration bars, Itachi was pleased to see that instead of remaining in a defensive crouch, Naruko now seemed more curious. He decided he had probably gained a bit of goodwill with the offering of food and spoke. "What is your name?" Itachi asked. Naruko looked confused for a moment before croaking out, "Naruko." Her voice was scratchy and hesitant, as though she hadn't spoken in a long time. It further confirmed Itachi's theory that she had been isolated for a while. "I'm Itachi," he introduced himself. He watched as Naruko tried several times to pronounce his name, finally seeming to get more comfortable with it. "Were you the one watching me for the past few weeks, Naruko?" Itachi asked. Naruko's face tightened, and her eyes darted around, searching for an escape route. "I'm not mad, Naruko. I'm just curious," Itachi said calmly. Naruko nodded timidly, still looking uncomfortable. "Why?" Itachi asked, genuinely interested. If she had been trying so hard to stay hidden, why spend time watching a shinobi, the very type of person most likely to notice her? Naruko reached behind her and pulled 2 worn kunai from her back pocket. Itachi went on high alert, though outwardly, he remained unchanged. Naruko turned toward a tree, keeping Itachi in her field of view, and threw the kunai, one after the other. The second kunai struck the first, deflecting it off course, causing it to hit the tree handle first. She was trying to learn the deflection technique? Itachi thought, astonished. The technique was difficult even for him, and widely considered impossible for anyone without the Sharingan. That she had managed even a rudimentary deflection at her age, even if it hadn't worked perfectly, was remarkable. He noticed the scowl on Naruko's face as she pulled out 2 more kunai and repeated the throw. This time, the deflected kunai landed point first, though only embedding itself slightly into the bark. Itachi stood in shock. He had never imagined that someone without the Sharingan could perform the necessary calculations for such a technique, let alone from simply observing someone else do it. He watched as Naruko used one of her chains to retrieve the fallen kunai and tuck them back into her pocket, looking pleased with her progress. "Where did you learn to throw kunai like that? Did your family teach you?" Itachi asked, his curiosity piqued. He immediately regretted the question when he saw Naruko withdraw into herself again. He cursed silently. If she were related to the Yondaime, an orphan, her family was probably gone. That would explain why someone with such a unique bloodline was alone in the woods, especially in a village like Konoha, which revered those with Kekkei Genkai. Uncharacteristically ashamed of himself, Itachi tried awkwardly to apologize. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have asked. I know many people who've lost their family, and it's very difficult," Itachi said quietly. He spoke from experience, as loss was common in the ninja world, and many Konoha shinobi had experienced it firsthand. He was surprised when Naruko, looking directly at him, suddenly spoke up. "I have a family," Naruko exclaimed. Itachi watched with caution as one of the 2 chains hovering around Naruko scratched at the ground. "See?" Naruko added, gesturing. "My family." Itachi took a step back, noticing a pair of crude drawings etched into the dirt. One depicted a man and a woman standing side by side, labeled Minato and Kushina. Beside them, a smaller figure was sketched, labeled Naruko, with chains emanating from it. Itachi's eyes widened as realization set in. He recognized those chains. He remembered his last lecture at the academy before the Kyuubi attack. It had been about Kekkei Genkai, with a focus on the unique abilities of Konoha's bloodlines. Part of the lesson had been taught by Kushina Uzumaki herself, who had demonstrated her chain abilities by binding another instructor in an instant. Itachi had only seen it briefly, without the Sharingan active, but now he was certain. If Naruko had inherited Kushina's bloodline, and her father was Minato, then this situation was far more complicated than he had imagined. Taking a deep breath, Itachi spoke again. Again, I'm sorry, Naruko. I didn't mean to imply that you didn't have a family. He chose his words carefully, trying to ease the tension. How long have you and your family been living in the forest? Itachi asked, hoping for a timeline to help him understand more about Naruko's situation. Naruko frowned, her face filled with uncertainty. I don't really know, she said with a shrug. I was about 4 when it all happened. It was a long time ago. If Naruko's story was true, that meant she had been living alone in the woods for nearly 2 years. That she had survived it all, and remained undetected, was nothing short of remarkable. Now came the crucial question. Itachi hesitated for a moment before asking, why did you go into the forest, Naruko? Why didn't you stay in Konoha? Naruko's expression shifted. She pulled her knees up to her chest, and the chains around her body tightened, creating a protective cocoon. Itachi noticed the change, and his concern grew. Just as he was about to speak again, Naruko's voice barely reached him. They tried to hurt me, Naruko whispered, her words filled with pain and sorrow. Itachi could hear the depth of the hurt in her voice, reminiscent of his own early experiences. It was the kind of pain that lingered long after the event, even when the physical wounds had healed. He tried to hurt me, but my chains stopped him. So, I went into the woods. There, I'm free. Itachi's mind raced as he began piecing together what had happened. Naruko had used her Kekkei Genkai in self-defense, and in her fear of being punished, she had run away to the woods. Itachi's thoughts turned inward. The villagers could be harsh in their judgments, especially towards those with special bloodlines. If Naruko had killed someone in self-defense, it could have been misunderstood. But who would try to harm a 4-year-old child? More information was needed, and it would require looking into the village records. But sending Naruko back into the village without understanding the full picture wasn't an option. Again, I'm sorry, Naruko, Itachi said gently, taking another careful step toward her. If the person was attacking you first, then it was self-defense. You have every right to protect yourself, no matter who is attacking. In a life or death situation, fairness is about survival. Naruko seemed to process his words slowly, her eyes thoughtful as she worked through them. I need to take care of a few things. Will you come back here in, say, 3 days? Itachi continued. I can bring you food, maybe some new clothes. Naruko glanced down at the worn remnants of her clothes and nodded. Though the situation was uncomfortable for her, having someone to talk to felt better than the isolation she had endured. Itachi's kindness, and his refusal to capture her, had earned him a level of trust from her. She nodded at him and extended one of her chains to catch a branch from one of the trees around the clearing. As Itachi watched Naruko move gracefully through the trees using her chains, he thought to himself, she moves like she's in a 3-dimensional world. She must be able to calculate those angles instinctively, just like when she moves through the trees. It's remarkable. Itachi turned and made his way back to the village, determined to uncover more answers. He had much to research, and time was running out. He hoped to understand more about Naruko's situation before their next meeting, but for now, he had to act quickly. Hinata had been waiting outside her mother's room for hours, sitting alongside her uncle as her sister struggled to be born. As time passed, her anxiety grew, and she couldn't help but wring her hands repeatedly, a sense of unease taking over her thoughts. Is it supposed to take this long? She asked her uncle, her voice laced with concern. She knew this question wasn't typical of the Hyuga family, who usually maintained a calm, stoic demeanor, but the long wait had worn her patience thin. It's different for each baby, Hisashi replied with a reassuring smile. When Neji was born, my wife was in labor for almost 9 hours. You, on the other hand, only took 4 hours. Trust in your mother. She's much stronger than you might realize. Hinata knew her mother was strong, but they had been waiting outside for so long without a word. Her mother had gone into the room around noon, and now it was well into the darkest part of the night. Her fidgeting seemed to affect Hisashi as he stood up, offering a suggestion. "Tell you what, I'll check on things and see if there's been any progress. Maybe you can get a chance to see your mother soon." Hinata nodded gratefully. Anything to break the long stretch of waiting. Hisashi slipped quietly into the room and closed the door behind him. Hinata waited, her worry building as she remained in the hallway. Suddenly, the door swung open, and she saw Hisashi rush out, with the shape of a doctor in a white coat following closely behind. The voices coming from the room were frantic, sending Hinata's anxiety into overdrive. Moments later, Hisashi returned with the doctor, both moving swiftly as they closed the door behind them. Hinata stood frozen, her thoughts swirling, unsure of what was happening. After a few tense moments, the door finally opened again. What she saw left her stunned. Her normally composed father was holding Hisashi tightly, expressing his gratitude in an uncharacteristic display of emotion. Hisashi pulled away from the embrace and walked over to Hinata. His smile was tight, but his words were calming. "There were some complications, but your mother and sister are fine. Would you like to see them?" Hinata nodded eagerly, relieved. She followed her uncle into the room, passing by her father, who looked exhausted, his eyes drooping as he swayed slightly on his feet. Despite his fatigue, he offered a soft smile, the first she had seen in nearly 2 years. Hinata turned her attention to the bed where her mother lay. Her mother was pale, her hair limp around her face, highlighting the deep circles under her eyes. Yet, despite her exhaustion, her mother wore a radiant smile as she extended a hand to Hinata, who grasped it tightly. In her other arm, she held a small, sleeping bundle, her dark hair visible beneath the soft fabric. "This is your sister, Hinata. Meet Hanabi." Her mother's voice was gentle. Hinata smiled, her heart full as she gazed at the tiny, sleeping girl in her mother's arms. "Hello, Hanabi," she whispered softly to her new sister, her excitement bubbling inside. Itachi had spent the last 10 hours in the restricted section of the Konoha library. As he went through each report, he felt his frustration growing. He had started by reading through the records of incidents from about 18 months ago, and quickly traced the identity of the man who had tried to attack Naruko. To his surprise, the man had been a current shinobi, a chunin even. The fact that the man had attacked a young child was disturbing enough, but Naruko's survival and the power of her chain spoke volumes about her resilience. Itachi was curious about the senseless attack, and as he delved deeper into the records, he found no clear reason for the aggression towards Naruko. He decided to take a different approach and searched through hospital records, hoping to uncover any history of incidents. What he found made his stomach turn. Naruko had been to the hospital no less than 70 times in her first 4 years. Her files included everything from poisoning to stab wounds, incidents that had apparently gone unnoticed by the authorities. That no one had ever been held accountable for any of these attacks spoke of a troubling indifference towards her. Itachi sat in his room that night, contemplating the information he had gathered. He had come to one painful conclusion: Naruko wasn't safe in Konoha. While her chains were a powerful asset, her inexperience with them made her vulnerable to skilled adversaries. If his suspicions were correct, she would face much more danger if she returned to the village in her current state. Itachi stared at the wall that separated his room from his brother's, his resolve strengthening. If Naruko was to survive, she would need to become stronger. He couldn't trust anyone else to ensure her safety, especially with the high-level conspiracy he suspected. The injuries Naruko had sustained in her early years were far too severe to be overlooked, and the lack of justice for them pointed to a deeper, more troubling cover-up. When Itachi finally fell asleep, he had already made up his mind. He would do whatever it took to train Naruko, to make her strong enough to protect herself and face whatever challenges lay ahead. She was the last living connection to one of Konoha's greatest heroes, and he would not let her down. Naruko's second cubby was remarkably similar to her first, constructed high in a tree from a hollowed-out spot that she deepened with her chains. It remained her sanctuary, the one place she felt safe, where she kept her greatest treasures. Her family was also there, and she felt a strong connection to it whenever she felt troubled or uncertain. Her conversation with Itachi had stirred up memories she had long buried, and as she sat in the darkness, she spoke quietly to the carvings she considered family, trying to clear her mind of those dark memories. It took her several hours to find peace, but eventually, she decided that her talk with Itachi had been more helpful than harmful. Itachi's validation of her actions gave her peace of mind, and when she finally fell asleep, she had even convinced herself that, in some way, what had happened might not entirely have been her fault. She slept peacefully, free from the usual nightmares that plagued her when her past resurfaced, snug in her tiny sanctuary. Itachi waited in the same clearing where he had met Naruko 3 days earlier, a large backpack in hand. It was almost noon, and he was slightly worried that Naruko might not show up. She had been willing to talk to him before, but she was also extremely skittish at the moment, and it was possible she might avoid him because of the uncomfortable questions he had asked. It was something Itachi could do little about, so he planned for the best and tried not to dwell on the alternative. He might have been able to catch Naruko if he could find her, but even an Inuzuka would have trouble tracking someone with Naruko's familiarity with the forest. If she wanted to hide, Itachi would have a hard time finding her. It was with a profound sense of relief that Itachi saw Naruko drop from a tree into the clearing, chains retracting behind her. She approached Itachi but maintained a 2-meter gap between them. Itachi held up the bag in his hand. "I brought you some basics. Clothing, food, nothing fancy." He tossed the bag to Naruko, who caught it with her chains. "Still doesn't trust me enough to catch something with her hands, or is it just more convenient to use the chains?" Itachi thought. He watched as Naruko pulled out a set of Sasuke's old clothes and looked down at her own attire. With a shrug, she pulled off her old top and replaced it with a black t-shirt. Her pants followed quickly, replaced with black shorts. Once Naruko had changed, she looked through the bag's remaining contents and pulled out a kunai, eyeing it curiously. She turned to Itachi, looking at him questioningly. "A gift," Itachi said. "I have an offer for you. I'd like to train you." Naruko frowned. Itachi could almost see the thoughts running through her head as she tried to find a hidden catch in the offer. Paranoia was something that most shinobi were not only familiar with but considered a good habit. "No catch, Naruko. I want you to be able to defend yourself. If you want to spend your life out here, that's your choice. But I would be doing both Konoha and you a disservice if I allowed those who would harm you to make the choice for you," Itachi said. He was intensely loyal to the village, even though he was disgusted with what many had done to Naruko. If he could help the village gain a valuable asset and give Naruko the tools to make choices about her own life, he felt it was his duty as a loyal Konoha shinobi to try. "You won't make me go back?" Naruko asked after a minute. Itachi could see her indecision, and quickly replied. "No. It is your choice whether or not you want to live in Konoha or stay out here," Itachi said, and then added, "I would never take your freedom from you." He'd had too many of his own choices restricted to do the same to Naruko unless he absolutely had to. Naruko tilted her head as she heard his words. She clearly recognized his earlier statement, and Itachi hoped it would help his case. Naruko finally nodded. "Will you teach me to use the red eyes?" she asked. Itachi chuckled slightly at that, shaking his head. "The red eyes are the Sharingan, and you have to be born with them. It's like your chains, something only my family can do." Naruko frowned at that, looking at her chains. "Only I can do this?" she asked skeptically. Itachi nodded. "Even if I trained for my entire life, I wouldn't be able to make them. They are a part of you, like your arms and legs. Some people are born with blonde hair, or black. You were born with the ability to make those chains, just as I was born with a Sharingan." Naruko nodded at that. It made sense, after all. Some people were taller than others or had different colored skin. Why not something like chains? Seeing her nod, Itachi pulled out a set of weights from his bag and tossed them to Naruko. She looked at them, then back at Itachi. "What do I do with these?" she asked. Itachi looked at her impassively. "You want to protect your freedom?" Naruko nodded. "Then put them on. It will not be easy, but if you let me, I can make sure no one forces you into anything you don't want again." Naruko stood a little taller at that. She liked her home in the forest, and was used to it, but she never wanted to be trapped again. She remembered how weak she had felt when she fought off the kidnapper and the fear she had felt when her chains first appeared. She reached forward for the weights, and missed Itachi's smile. 2 months later. Naruko was never sure if she admired or disliked Itachi. She could never pinpoint exactly why she felt that he took a perverse pleasure in pushing her limits, but she was completely convinced it was true. Despite that, she also had to admit that she felt better than she ever had before. At first, the weights had been incredibly difficult. They were the lightest in a series that grew increasingly heavy, but for someone Naruko's size, they made up a significant portion of her body weight. It had been a struggle to even move in them at first, made worse by Itachi having her rely solely on her limbs and not her chains. He claimed it was to build her physical strength, but Naruko had grown so accustomed to using her chains for extra mobility that it felt like someone had asked her to run with only one leg. Slowly, it had gotten better, but every time Naruko seemed to adjust to one set of weights, Itachi would add more. Sometimes, she had nightmares about a room filled with endlessly larger weights, with Itachi on a throne made of the weights she had already mastered. In those nightmares, she wasn't allowed to leave until she could do 100 push-ups with the entire throne on her back. In between the basic training with weights, Itachi would teach Naruko the basics of jutsu. At first, she had been excited to learn, dreaming of breathing fire or controlling the earth. However, Itachi quickly disabused her of that notion, explaining that until she could learn to control her chakra properly, such feats would be impossible. It had taken Naruko nearly a month to get the right balance of physical and spiritual energy, and she had been thrilled for a brief moment before Itachi tested her. He immediately declared her chakra control as the worst I've ever seen, and had her sit with a leaf in her hand. He instructed her to push chakra from her hand until the leaf was pushed off, and told Naruko that she wouldn't progress in jutsu until she could keep the leaf afloat above her hand for at least 5 minutes. Over the past month, the leaves Naruko had used had burned, shredded, flown off to embed in trees like tiny razors, and once, inexplicably, exploded. But she had only managed to keep them afloat for 3 minutes. It was slow, frustrating work, but she was making progress. Itachi pushed her harder than anyone else ever had in her life, but Naruko couldn't help but admit that she was starting to understand why he trained her the way he did. It worked. The one place where Naruko truly excelled was her kunai and shuriken work. She had practiced for months on her own before meeting Itachi, using borrowed equipment. However, having someone show her the proper techniques with top-quality tools made a significant difference. While she still couldn't execute more than one deflection accurately, she could at least get close with a double deflection, which always amazed Itachi. Her progress with shuriken and kunai helped keep her motivated, despite Itachi's insistence that she complete the leaf floating exercise before teaching her more advanced jutsu. Today marked the second day in a row Naruko trained alone since Itachi had a mission outside the village. Without him there, it felt wrong to use the training grounds, so she decided to leap from tree branch to tree branch with weights on, occasionally stopping to practice her chakra exercises by grabbing a leaf. As she neared the westernmost point of her territory, she stopped. There was a group of 3 people near the clearing where she had fought a kidnapper, walking leisurely with a large picnic basket in hand. From nearly 50 feet up in the large tree, Naruko stopped, grasped a branch, and wrapped her chains around herself like a cloak, as was her usual habit when in the trees. She recognized most of the ninjas who patrolled the area around her home by sight, but this group was dressed in kimonos and appeared to be out for nothing more than a picnic. Just as she was about to leave, Naruko noticed the shortest person in the group and recognized her. It was Hinata. Intrigued, Naruko stayed to observe as the group set up for a picnic, all the while continuing her chakra exercises. After all, she had to complete the leaf floating exercise for Itachi to train her in more advanced techniques. XXXXX. As Hinata walked through the forest with her mother and uncle towards the spot where she had been rescued from her kidnapper, she wondered again if Naruko was somewhere nearby. The last time she had seen her, she had leapt off into the forest on her strange chains, and Hinata couldn't help but wonder if she was okay. When her mother had suggested a walk outside the compound, Hinata had, in a rare moment of initiative, suggested a picnic in the forest. Initially, her mother had been wary about leaving the village walls, but her uncle had offered to come along, and the area was well patrolled. Her mother had been surprised by Hinata's suggestion, but had assumed it was an attempt to replace the bad memories of that place with positive experiences. What she didn't know was that Hinata didn't associate the clearing with her kidnapper at all. The compound was where she had been taken from, but the clearing was where she had been saved. It was where someone had answered her frantic prayers, offering her hope. She had wanted to come back because it was the last place she had seen Naruko. They set up their picnic, and Hinata and her mother chatted about small matters while Hanabi gurgled happily in her mother's arms. Hisashi remained standing for a while but eventually sat at the edge of the blanket, nibbling on a sandwich while keeping watch. It was a peaceful outing, but as time passed, Hinata began to feel a bit guilty. She had come out here, hoping to see Naruko again, and now she was dragging her family along for nothing. Trying to hide her feelings, her mother seemed to notice something was wrong. "Is something troubling you, Hinata?" her mother asked gently. Hinata blushed and shook her head. It's nothing, mother," she mumbled. Her mother smiled warmly and then looked toward the spot where the Kumo ambassador had once been found, pierced by an unknown assailant. "You know, the memories we try hardest to escape are often the ones that follow us the most," her mother said softly, her gaze returning to Hinata. "Only when we face them directly can we see them for what they are and finally let them go." Hinata shook her head slightly, not wanting to let that memory go. It was one of the only times she could remember someone, outside of her mother, treating her like she truly mattered. Someone had risked everything to save her life, not even knowing who she was. It reminded her that there were people outside the clan who didn't see her as weak. Her mother caught a blush creeping up her neck and shifted her tone. "Or perhaps you're not running away from a memory, but chasing one?" she asked playfully. Hisashi raised an eyebrow, amused by his wife's words. He had always liked Hitomi, but her love for romantic stories could sometimes be a bit much. Hinata's face turned bright red, and her mother laughed softly. Who knows, maybe she's watching over you right now. Her mother teased. Hinata ducked her head in embarrassment, and Hanabi giggled. Her mother finally took pity on her. You'll see her again if fate is kind, my dear, her mother said gently. She lifted Hinata's chin and looked her in the eyes. After all, I owe her for saving one of my two precious treasures, don't I? Hinata shyly nodded. They packed up their meal and walked out of the clearing. As they passed back into the forest, Hinata glanced back across the clearing, where she had last seen Naruko leap away. She would later swear she saw a pair of blue eyes high in the trees, watching as they left. XXXXX. Itachi entered the Hokage's office, the completed mission scroll in hand. After handing it over, the Hokage made a motion, and the Anbu in the room silently left. In moments, the room was empty, and Itachi and the Hokage were alone. The Hokage activated the security seals built into the room, and the subtle pressure on Itachi's ear signified that the room was now sealed to sound. Your other mission? The Hokage inquired. Itachi nodded. They've been tentatively seeking alliances with several clans in Suna, and at least one in Kiri that I could find out about. Itachi pulled another scroll from his vest and handed it over. I couldn't confirm if they secured any alliances except with the Kiri clan, but they've made progress with all the listed groups. The Hokage sighed, his face showing the wear of his 61 years. They really are going through with it, aren't they? Itachi didn't answer, the question was rhetorical. The Hokage turned toward him. Do you know when they plan to strike? Itachi nodded. It will be in the next 15 months. The equipment being stockpiled won't be ready for at least 12 months, so that's the earliest possibility. 13 months seems more likely, but anything beyond that would just be good luck. The Hokage nodded tiredly. 13 months to prevent the biggest disaster this village has faced since the Kyuubi incident. Sometimes, I wish I didn't have this job, he said. Itachi silently agreed. The Hokage's role was thankless, requiring immense effort and sacrifice, only for everything built to be constantly under threat, sometimes even from those they sought to protect. The position demanded tremendous sacrifices, and Itachi respected the man for taking it on, not once, but twice. The Hokage looked up at Itachi. You may go. Keep me updated. Itachi gave a shallow bow and left the room. As he made his way back to the Uchiha district, he pondered the challenge ahead. He had 13 months to change the course of his clan, or betray the village he loved by following his family in rebellion. Sometimes, he envied Naruko's simple life in the forest. Freedom, he mused, isn't always about doing whatever you want when you want. Sometimes, it's about choosing the set of constraints you can live with, or simply living with the consequences of what you've been forced to do. That night, his sleep was restless, the weight of the decision he had to make looming over him. 13 months to decide. But how could he choose when both options seemed impossible to live with? For Itachi, the last few months had been a mix of some of the best and most challenging times in his life. He had yet to find a clear solution to his biggest dilemma, choosing between his clan and his loyalty to Konoha. However, in training Naruko, he had found a simple purpose. It was something he could devote himself to fully, without the need for secrecy or sleepless nights, for which Itachi was thankful. Even more, Naruko proved to be an enjoyable student. Unlike his brother, who tried to emulate Itachi in hopes of surpassing him, Naruko was full of surprises. He fondly remembered some of her more unconventional attempts at ninjutsu, such as her copy of Itachi's crow clone technique. Itachi had been training Naruko for over 3 months, and they had started working on the basic 3 jutsus. Naruko had shown promise with both the substitution and transformation techniques, though her clone technique needed some improvement. Itachi had noticed early on that Naruko had an unusually large chakra pool for someone her age. While her control had improved greatly under his guidance, the basic clone jutsu required so little chakra that it was difficult for her to perform. Itachi suggested trying a more advanced clone technique that would require more chakra, and Naruko adapted to it quickly. However, when Naruko asked about Itachi's crow clone technique, he explained that only those who held the crow summoning contract could perform it. The next day, Naruko's response left Itachi temporarily speechless. They had been practicing clone techniques again, and Naruko had picked up the shadow clone technique with surprising ease. She instinctively understood the jutsu, and her vast chakra reserves made it a valuable tool in combat. But as Itachi was thinking about the implications of facing multiple Narukos wielding transparent chains, he witnessed something unexpected. Naruko suddenly dispersed into a flock of crows. At first, Itachi thought it was an illusion, but as he activated his Sharingan, he realized Naruko was no longer there. Itachi quickly summoned a crow using a summoning scroll, but when he opened it, he found only his own name. Perplexed, Itachi saw Naruko emerge from behind a tree, smiling. She explained that she had used a transformation technique to create the illusion of the crows, which dispersed as soon as they spread too far apart. The illusion was convincing enough that anyone watching would assume Naruko had disappeared just as Itachi himself could. It was this type of out-of-the-box thinking that made Naruko unique in Itachi's eyes. She had been alone for so long that she didn't have the same assumptions and limitations that many Konoha shinobi did. Her mind was free of constraints, and she didn't know when something was supposed to be impossible. Itachi found himself learning from Naruko, adopting some of her unconventional methods, such as using clones as substitution targets. Even his Anbu colleagues took notice of his unorthodox techniques. His best friend Shisui had been surprised by Itachi's idea of using a substitution for movement rather than just a dodge. Over the months, Naruko had opened up to Itachi more. She was no longer the guarded child he had first met. She had become more expressive, showing exuberance when happy and fierce determination when focused on a goal. There were times when Itachi had to remind her of the importance of rest, as she had a tendency to train tirelessly. The one area where Itachi struggled to help Naruko was with her mysterious chains. His Sharingan revealed that the chains were dense chakra constructs, but he still couldn't fully understand how they moved independently or how to predict their actions. The more he trained with Naruko, the more he realized that these chains would be a powerful tool in the future. However, he had inadvertently mentioned that he had known a woman with similar abilities, which led Naruko to ask about her parents. For the first time, Naruko had asked about her parents. It was a rare moment of vulnerability, and Itachi could see the pain in her eyes. It reminded him of the day he had learned about his own family's history. Itachi shared with Naruko the little he knew about her parents, both of whom had been Konoha shinobi. Though the information was limited, Naruko hung on to every word. It was clear that she saw training as a way to connect with her parents, even if she would never truly know them. Since then, Naruko had poured herself into her training, driven by a desire to honor their legacy. 6 months into their training, Itachi decided that Naruko had learned enough basic techniques to begin focusing on the more complex aspects of being a shinobi. He now wanted to teach her when and why to use the skills she had acquired. Naruko, Itachi began, looking at the young girl as she sat before him. When you think of a shinobi, what comes to mind? Do you think of a hero, like your father? Or a silent protector, like the man who drove you into the woods? Naruko paused to think before answering. She had sensed that this question was important to Itachi, and she didn't want to answer lightly. Finally, she spoke. I think of someone with freedom, Naruko said thoughtfully. Itachi blinked, surprised. Freedom? What do you mean? Naruko took a deep breath. A shinobi has power, but that doesn't define them. A shinobi is someone who can choose their path. My parents died protecting the village during the Kyuubi attack. I'll never know who they really were, but they gave everything to protect everyone. They used their freedom to make a choice, and even though it meant leaving me behind, they did it because it was the right thing to do. Naruko's expression was open and sincere, and Itachi could see the depth of her thoughts. She had clearly spent a long time reflecting on her parents and their decision. Naruko continued. That power means you have the freedom to choose. It means you can do what you think is right, even if it means facing difficult consequences. Sometimes, there are bigger things to protect than just your own happiness. Itachi sat in stunned silence. Despite her young age, Naruko's words were wise beyond her years. She had accepted her parents' choice and found a way to move forward, using her training as a means to understand their actions. That's a good answer, Naruko, Itachi finally said. A shinobi must choose their path. Sometimes, those choices are difficult, but it's important to always act in what you believe is right. And once you find what you want to protect, that's when you'll know you've found your true path. Naruko nodded in agreement, and Itachi could see that she was more determined than ever to continue her journey. That night, Itachi sat alone on top of the Hokage monument, looking over the village. He saw the lights glowing from countless homes, the lives he was sworn to protect, all safe beneath his watch. Freedom, he thought, reflecting on Naruko's words. The ability to do what you believe is right, even if it's not the easiest choice. He closed his eyes, wondering if he could make the right choice for the future. Naruko sat on a branch high above the walls of Konoha, gazing at the village that had been a source of both pain and hope for her. The conversation she had with Itachi 3 weeks ago had left her restless, with sleepless nights that drove her to train harder than ever before, hoping it would quiet her mind. If you find the thing you want to protect amongst all others, then you've found your true path. Never forget that, and no matter which path you choose, you'll be able to stand proud. Naruko had replayed these words over and over, but she still didn't know what to protect. Could it be the village that had rejected her, that had pushed her away? But then, this same village had brought her closer to people like Hinata and Itachi. So, maybe not everyone was bad. Naruko knew, at the very least, she wanted to protect the ones she cared about, to honor the sacrifices her parents made. After all, they gave their lives to protect this village, so perhaps she owed them this chance to protect it in return. Night after night, these thoughts filled her mind, and she began to spend hours watching the village. Her favorite places to observe were the Uchiha and Hyuga clan compounds. Though they were located on opposite ends of the forest she lived near, the walk was worth it when she could catch glimpses of her important people. What confused her, however, was how differently people treated those two clans. From what Itachi had told her, Hinata was meant to be the next head of the Hyuga clan. Yet, one older man at the compound always seemed to treat her unkindly, almost as though he resented her. Naruko would have thought the man hated her, but sometimes, she'd see him escorting Hinata around, like when they had a picnic in the forest. It was like they were two different people entirely. By contrast, whenever Naruko saw Itachi in the compound, people treated him like royalty. They bowed to him, or spoke with the utmost respect. It was a mystery to her, but she didn't want to admit to Itachi that she'd been watching them. Nor did she want to mention that she'd been struggling with sleepless nights. For now, she would leave the mystery unsolved. The thing you want to protect. She thought to herself, before sighing. She would figure it out eventually. Hiruzen Sarutobi, the Hokage of Konoha, stood deep within the hidden depths of an Anbu base, surrounded by two of his most trusted ninja. He was finalizing a decision he never thought he would have to make. Are you sure you can handle this on your own? Hiruzen asked the two Uchiha before him. Itachi had been part of the plan from its beginning nearly 2 years ago, but Shisui had only joined recently. Hiruzen had never trusted Danzo fully, but even he couldn't deny the man's thoroughness. We can do this. With Shisui's Mangekyo and my own abilities, we will catch them off guard, Itachi replied calmly, his voice steady despite the enormity of their task. Danzo stepped forward, nodding. We will have loyal Anbu agents stationed nearby, should any of them try to flee. Hiruzen nodded in acknowledgement, though his heart weighed heavily with the decision. Then it settled. 1 month from now, the Uchiha clan will be reduced to only 2 members, Hiruzen said, his voice heavy with regret. He had always believed in the ideal of unity between the Uchiha and Senju, but now it seemed that unity was a dream slipping further out of reach. Naruko paced nervously in the clearing she and Itachi often used to train. Itachi was late, a rarity in all the time she had known him. She considered running to the trees overlooking the Uchiha compound to try and spot him, but just as she was about to leave, she spotted Itachi emerging from the other side of the clearing. Naruko opened her mouth to greet him, but the expression on Itachi's face made her hesitate. What's wrong? Naruko asked as Itachi stopped in front of her, his Anbu mask hanging from his belt. I'm going on a mission, Itachi replied, his tone distant. A long one. How long? When will you be back? Naruko asked, concern rising in her voice. Itachi had gone on missions before, but something about this one felt different. I don't know. It could be years, Itachi said, and Naruko felt her heart sink at the words. He was one of the few constants in her life. The thought of him leaving, perhaps forever, was difficult to bear. Itachi handed Naruko a scroll, which she took with trembling hands. These are some chakra exercises to help with your control, and a jutsu I've developed. It will be useful, especially with your mastery over shadow clones. Naruko nodded, trying to hide the fear she felt. Are you leaving now? She asked. Tonight, Itachi replied. But I have something else to do in the village first. I won't be able to see you before I go. Naruko's heart ached at the thought, but she nodded, determined not to show how upset she was. She turned and ran into the forest, returning about 20 minutes later holding something in her hands. She stopped in front of Itachi, her heart heavy with emotion. Here, Naruko said, holding out the small carved object. It was a small piece of wood, shaped into 2 figures, one of Naruko herself, with her signature chains over her shoulders, and one of a boy with short hair, holding 2 kunai in each hand. The figures were labeled with their names. I know you'll be alone on your mission. But if my family can keep me company, I can keep you company too, Naruko said with a sad smile. Itachi looked at the carving, then gently placed it inside his Anbu vest. Thank you, Naruko, he said, his voice soft and sincere. He placed a hand on her shoulder, giving it a gentle squeeze. Then, without another word, he pulled his animal mask over his face and vanished, disappearing into the shadows. Naruko watched him go, holding the scroll tightly in her hands. She would train, and when Itachi returned, she would show him just how much stronger she had become. Itachi had been through many difficult nights, but tonight, everything seemed to unravel. He found Shisui, who had only one eye, just in time to watch his best friend tear out the other and entrust it to him for safekeeping. Before Itachi could fully comprehend what had happened, Shisui threw himself into the river, and Itachi couldn't find him again. He had hoped that his mission would be clear-cut, but the weight of his actions felt overwhelming. When he reached his parents' room, he found them waiting for him, not with anger or blame, but with pride and love. His father expressed admiration for Itachi's resolve, while his mother simply told him how proud she was of him. Her only request was that he look after Sasuke. The weight of his family's words tore at his heart as he carried out his mission, and the burden of his actions would stay with him forever. As he continued his task, he could not shake the images of his family and the love they had shown him. But he had made his choice, and there was no turning back now. Then you know the next part of your mission, Danzo said. You'll take care of Sasuke? Itachi asked. It was the only thing keeping him going at this point. Your brother will be treated with the utmost respect, the last of the revered Uchiha clan. He will never know of your clan's betrayal. Danzo hesitated. Are you sure you don't want to remain in Konoha? Anbu are faceless, after all. A simple change of mask and we could give you a new identity. Danzo was not overly emotional, but the loss of such an asset as Itachi was unfortunate, and he would avoid it if possible. Regardless, Itachi shook his head. I can do more on the other mission. I am uniquely suited for that assignment. Danzo nodded slightly. Then I wish you good luck. Your first check-in is in 1 month, in the capital of Rice Country. Itachi nodded, and Danzo slipped back into the shadows. Itachi ran up the wall next to him and leapt off into the forest. He had only gone about 3/4 of a mile when he sensed a familiar presence shadowing him. He pulled into a clearing and stopped. You can come out, Naruko. I know you're there. He called out quietly. He knew how sharp Naruko's hearing was, so there was no need to shout. He watched as Naruko stepped out of the trees, her now light red hair the only thing differentiating her from the shadows around her. In a detached part of his mind, Itachi was proud to see how well Naruko was applying her stealth training. Naruko stared at Itachi silently for several minutes, her eyes boring into the holes in Itachi's Anbu mask. Finally, she spoke one word. Why? She asked. Surprisingly, there was no condemnation in her tone. Itachi knew that Naruko had somehow discovered his actions that night, but how could she not hate Itachi after what he'd done? After all, even Itachi hated himself over his mission that night. I had to prove myself, Itachi said, falling back on the same story he'd told Sasuke. I had to know the limits of my power, so I used them to test myself. They were nothing more than the meter I used to measure my growth. Naruko's expression didn't change at all as Itachi spoke. Itachi waited for her to say something, to yell at him for betraying the very principles he'd instilled in her over the last year. Her answer shocked Itachi and sent him scrambling. Then why were you sick after doing it? One simple sentence, and Itachi's narrative was destroyed. He cursed Naruko's penchant for sneaking and her night vision. How could I not have noticed her watching me? He wondered, then answered his own question. He was so messed up from the weight of his mission that even a civilian could probably have snuck up on him. For someone like Naruko, who'd spent years avoiding forest patrols, it had been child's play. His mind was racing to come up with another reason, one that would keep Naruko from the truth and still be believable. Naruko continued to stare at him and then repeated the words from a long-ago conversation in the training grounds. Sometimes we have to do what's right, even if it hurts the ones closest to us. Itachi looked at her in surprise. Naruko just shrugged. I don't know why you did what you did, but I have faith in you, Itachi-sensei, she spoke. Itachi rocked back on his heels. The simple words had a profound effect. He'd worried about what Naruko would think of him after today, and to find out she didn't vilify him was cleansing. Itachi was struck by the sudden urge to explain himself, to have someone, anyone, know the truth outside of the Hokage and Danzo. He couldn't bring himself to tell Naruko the whole truth, but he could at least let her know that he hadn't betrayed her, that the things he taught her were still worthwhile. Sometimes we have to follow orders that we hate in order to protect what we love, Itachi spoke quietly, and saw Naruko nod, though her eyes narrowed. Itachi watched as she looked back at the village, remembering the times he had told her about his reasons for serving the village and his philosophy about the duty of a shinobi. Itachi saw the connections forming, and a look of resolution came over her face. "You're not coming back, are you?" she asked. Itachi shook his head. "No. I'll be branded a missing ninja after this." Naruko frowned. "That's not right." Itachi cut her off. "It's what I chose. My sacrifice is a small one, in the grand scheme of things. If this keeps the village safe, then I'll gladly pay it." Naruko looked at him. "Then I'll protect it for you," she said stubbornly. Itachi's eyes widened. If Naruko really meant that. The possibilities began to run through his head. He didn't want to force Naruko into something out of a misplaced sense of obligation to him, but Naruko was strong now, strong enough to protect herself from any civilians and most of the lower-ranked ninja at least. She would be safer in Konoha, especially with the hunter nin that would be combing the country for him. Another thought struck him, and he smiled inwardly. If he was going to send his surrogate little sister into the lion's den, so to speak, there was one more set of claws he could give her. "If you truly mean that, then you'll need to see the Hokage after you wake up," he said. "Tell him nothing of speaking to me, though, Naruko. This is a secret you cannot speak to anyone about, under penalty of severe consequences. My sacrifice would be in vain otherwise." Naruko nodded slowly, not fully understanding but trusting that Itachi knew what he was talking about, then stopped. "Wait, what do you mean wake up?" Naruko said, confused. Itachi simply looked at her, the 3 commas of his activated Sharingan spinning. As Naruko fell to the ground unconscious, he reached into the vest of his Anbu uniform and pulled out an object. "The last gift I can give you, Naruko. Use it wisely. XXXXXX." Deep inside Naruko's subconscious, trapped behind great iron bars and a seal insignia, the Kyuubi growled as his container was placed under a genjutsu by the Sharingan. "Those eyes are a nuisance," he grumbled quietly to himself. He couldn't help but feel a bit of camaraderie with his host over the situation, however. He'd been under the Sharingan's influence, and knew exactly how powerful it could be. That didn't mean he wouldn't make fun of his container for falling for that trick again the next time they met, however. He couldn't see anything through the seal, but he could sense the chakras around him, and noticed Itachi's chakra signature coming closer. There was a familiar feeling as he activated a jutsu, and the Kyuubi looked up at the top of his cage as if he could see through it. "Oh, what's this?" he said softly, curiosity and surprise present in his voice. A second later, he felt a second chakra signature, too small to be another person, interact with the jutsu Itachi was using. "You sneaky son of a. Now things are getting interesting," he chuckled at that. "I can't wait to see how this plays out. I haven't been part of anything this exciting since. Well, since the last time I fought Hashirama." The Kyuubi mused to himself. It was rather boring, being trapped inside the stomach of a 7-year-old, but now he had something to look forward to. "Don't die too soon, kid," he mumbled to himself. "This is just getting fun." He laughed long and hard at that, as Naruko slumbered, unaware of her tenant's amusement. XXXXX. When Naruko woke, she had a pounding headache and a curse on her lips for red-eyed individuals and genjutsus in general. She pulled her aching body slowly to her feet and stumbled over to a nearby stream. A long drink and several splashes of cold water later, she felt more awake. Judging by the position of the sun, it was still early morning, no more than 2 or 3 hours since sunrise. She thought back to her meeting with Itachi, and the cryptic remarks he'd made. He said he was following orders. Naruko thought. And if he can't tell me about it, then maybe whoever ordered it can. But I can't ask if what Itachi-sensei said was right, she concluded with a nod. If she was ever going to find out what had happened to cause Itachi to leave the village like that, she was going to have to find a way to get into the Hokage's records or someone else suitably highly placed. Naruko's head throbbed at the thought of how long a plan like that would take. Might as well just become the Hokage at that point, she grumbled to herself. Either way, she had her directions from Itachi, and they seemed like a good idea anyway. She was a little wary of going back to the village but no longer feared the civilians. After all, if what Itachi had said was true, she was stronger than most of the Genin in the village, so a civilian shouldn't be any danger. It took her nearly an hour to reach her destination, and she was relieved to see her targets out in the open. It would be much more difficult to get close to them if they were inside or under guard, and she didn't really trust anyone else to help her. She climbed the wall around the compound with ease, her chains acting as anchors while her feet gripped the slippery wall with a thin coating of chakra. At the top, she anchored one chain into the wall, and wrapped the other around her like a cloak. Itachi had told her that the chain confused his Sharingan and would probably be difficult to detect for anyone who relied on chakra to see. He'd also given Naruko a crash course on the other bloodline users in Konoha, so she knew she'd need every advantage she could get to remain unseen. Thankfully, either due to her own efforts or the commotion around the aftermath at the Uchiha estate, she managed to make it into the gardens she'd been aiming for without anyone raising the alarm. She allowed her anchor line to dissipate at the top, retracting the rest inside herself, and took a deep breath to gather her courage. This would be the first time in more than 3 years that she'd had any real contact with someone other than Itachi. Before her courage could flag, she stepped resolutely out of the bushes in front of her targets. They both looked at her in surprise, the older woman falling back into a defensive stance. Hi, Naruko said awkwardly, not sure what to do about the woman apparently ready to beat her senseless. Could you take me to the Hokage by any chance? Hiruzen looked at the report on his desk with a deep frown. 134 people displaced because Fugaku couldn't be satisfied with the peace that was already in place, he thought. Rarely had Hiruzen seen such unfortunate consequences come from such needless actions. The entire situation left him unsettled, especially after Shisui's sudden absence. Now, instead of having a few trusted Uchiha clan members to help restore balance, only a young child remained. He sighed. What a difficult situation. He looked up at a knock on the door. His secretary peeked inside, and the 2 Anbu guards stationed nearby, Inu and Kat, tensed briefly before relaxing upon recognizing the visitor. Hokage-sama? The secretary began. Hiruzen motioned for her to continue. The Hyuga matriarch is here to see you. She says it's urgent. Hiruzen nodded, his curiosity piqued. The Lady Hyuga rarely came to him without good reason, and today, of all days, he wondered what could be so pressing. The door opened again, and 3 individuals entered the room. The first 2 Hiruzen immediately recognized, Hitomi Hyuga and her young daughter, Hinata, who stayed close behind her mother, peeking out shyly. But when the third figure stepped forward, Hiruzen's eyes widened in surprise. His pipe slipped from his hand and tapped the desk. Even Inu did a double take. You, Inu exclaimed, startling the timid Hinata. A small, calm smile touched the young girl's lips, and Hiruzen had the distinct feeling she wasn't entirely surprised by the reaction. She turned toward the Hokage with respectful composure. Hello, Hokage-sama, she greeted warmly. Hiruzen took a long breath, trying to ease the rising pressure of what would surely be more paperwork. He gave a tired, but genuine smile. Hello, Naruko. So, my dear YouTube family. That's all for part 1. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Stay tuned for the next part. With appreciation. 6 Path Weeb.